There comes a subtle yet powerful turning point in the life of every man and woman, a season where the energy of youth begins to quiet and the responsibilities of maturity take center stage. That turning point for most arrives at the age of 35. To the casual eye, it appears to be an age of balance, an age where careers are settled, families are established, and the storms of youthful uncertainty have been replaced by stability. Yet behind this appearance of calm lies a silent surrender, a surrender to the invisible forces of mediocrity, routine, and resignation. For many, 35 is not the dawn of fulfillment, but the beginning of a gradual decline into a life of quiet disappointment. Why does this happen? Because 35 is the age at which dreams are most often abandoned and traded for survival. When a man is young, he lives in the realm of imagination, fueled by visions of greatness, unafraid to dare, to attempt, to fall, and to rise again. But by the time he reaches his mid-30s, the failures of the past, the responsibilities of the present, and the fears of the future converge upon him. It is at this point that the majority choose safety over ambition, conformity over originality, and excuses over action. The tragedy of 35 is not that people lack opportunity, it is that they lack the courage to seize it. By this age, most have already experienced enough disappointments to convince themselves that their grandest visions were childish fantasies. They come to believe that their station in life is permanent, that what they have achieved so far is all they are destined to achieve. The mind, once alive with daring possibility, becomes subdued by the weight of routine. The man who once dreamed of building empires now settles for maintaining paychecks. The woman who once envisioned a life of passion and adventure now contents herself with the ordinary. But the truth is this: 35 is not a point of ending, but a point of awakening if one chooses to see it. It is the age when the first half of life has taught its lessons, and the second half stands ready to reward those who refuse to surrender. Yet most people do not see it this way. They allow the habits formed in the first 3 decades to harden into chains. Instead of using their failures as stepping stones, they turn them into tombstones. They declare without words, but with their actions, "This is who I am, and this is all I will ever be." Think of the countless individuals who, by 35, have given up the pursuit of financial independence because their early ventures ended in loss. They bury their entrepreneurial spirit under the soil of debt and disappointment. Or consider the man who once had the ambition to write, to paint, to build, to create, but who, after years of distraction and delay, convinces himself it is too late. At 35, he chooses to close the book on his own potential, forgetting that some of the greatest achievements in history were born long after this age. The reason most people fail at 35 is not because they lack ability, intelligence, or opportunity. It is because they accept the lie that life is already decided. They confuse a chapter with the conclusion of the book. They allow the pressure of society to dictate their path, falling victim to the belief that adulthood means settling for less than what the heart once desired. At 35, the world expects a man or woman to be responsible, and responsibility is often misinterpreted as abandoning dreams. The father of 3 feels he cannot risk pursuing his true passion because he must provide stability. The woman managing a household and a career convinces herself that her dreams must wait until the children are grown, forgetting that life is never waiting, it is passing. And so instead of igniting the fire of purpose within, they allow it to flicker and fade until it becomes nothing more than a faint memory of what once was possible. This surrender, however, is not immediate. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. It begins when a man chooses comfort over challenge, when he stops learning because he believes he already knows enough, when he begins to justify his inaction with the excuse of realism. It begins when he looks at his peers, sees that they too have surrendered, and convinces himself that mediocrity must be normal. And so he conforms, forgetting that conformity is the silent thief of greatness. By 35, the average person has already sold his birthright of greatness for the false security of routine. He stops chasing excellence, stops daring, stops fighting. He no longer believes in miracles because he has not seen one in years. He no longer prays with fire because he has learned to live without hope. He no longer invests in himself because he has been taught that personal growth is a luxury, not a necessity. Yet, history teaches us otherwise. The age of 35 is not an age of decline, but of power. It is the age when vision, if pursued, is sharpened by the lessons of experience. It is the age when resilience, if chosen, is stronger because it has already been tested. It is the age when dreams, if kept alive, can be pursued with a wisdom that youth never possessed. The difference between those who fail and those who rise lies not in circumstance but in decision. The man who fails at 35 is the man who decides his story is finished. The man who succeeds at 35 and beyond is the one who decides his story has just begun. One path leads to slow decay, the other to a late blooming that can surpass even the brightest youth. So the real question is not why most people fail at 35, but why you must refuse to. You must recognize this age for what it is, a crossroad, not a coffin. You must understand that what most call maturity is often disguised defeat. And you must commit with renewed determination that while others settle into the comfort of average, you will rise into the challenge of greatness. For the truth is this: 35 is not the end. It is the beginning of the most powerful years of your life. If you refuse to surrender to the invisible chains that bind the majority, it is the season when the excuses of youth must die and the discipline of purpose must be born. It is the moment when you choose once and for all whether you will be counted among the masses who fail or the few who rise. The life of the average person at 35 is governed not by vision but by routine. It is a rhythm repeated so consistently that it becomes invisible to the one living it, like a wheel that turns endlessly but never advances. Wake up, go to work, pay the bills, return home, collapse into distraction, sleep, and repeat. At first glance, there appears to be stability in this pattern, even safety. But beneath this rhythm lies the very chain that holds millions captive, the illusion of security. Routine is deceptive because it feels reliable. It promises to shield a man from risk, to protect him from failure, to guarantee that tomorrow will look very much like today. And to the fearful, this promise is seductive. Yet what they fail to see is that routine, when not directed by a clear and burning purpose, becomes nothing more than a slow death lived in installments. It offers comfort in exchange for growth, predictability in exchange for progress, and sameness in exchange for potential. Most people who fail at 35 have not collapsed from lack of opportunity. They have suffocated under the weight of routine. Day after day, their actions become mechanical, their thoughts predictable, their desires dulled. They mistake motion for progress, not realizing that years of movement without direction only leads them deeper into the forest of mediocrity. The job they took as a stepping stone becomes a permanent prison. The temporary compromise becomes a lifelong contract. The house they bought to secure their family becomes a shackle that binds them to a paycheck they no longer love. This is the tragedy of routine. It convinces a man that he is safe when in truth he is only trapped. He confuses his salary with stability, his possessions with success, his schedule with purpose. He believes he has escaped risk because he no longer dares, when in reality he has embraced the greatest risk of all, the risk of living an unlived life. For security is the most dangerous illusion ever sold to mankind. It whispers promises of protection but delivers only limitation. It tells a man he cannot fall, yet it ensures he will never rise. At 35, this illusion tightens its grip because the stakes appear higher. A man feels he cannot afford to take chances. His children depend on him, his debts weigh upon him, his reputation is already established. He convinces himself that bold moves belong to youth, that now is the time for being realistic. But what he calls realism is nothing more than fear in disguise. He is afraid to disrupt the familiar, afraid to risk embarrassment, afraid to start anew, and so he remains bound, convincing himself that the prison he lives in is in fact a fortress of safety. Consider the millions who remain in careers they despise because the paycheck feels secure. They rise each morning with heaviness in their hearts, drag themselves to tasks that no longer inspire them, and count the hours until they may escape. Yet they cling to that very job as though it were life itself, not realizing that the security they seek is nothing more than dependence upon another's decision to keep them employed. What appears stable is in fact the most fragile position of all. The illusion of security extends beyond careers into every area of life. It is the reason many refuse to start the business they once dreamed of, to pursue the talent they once nurtured, to invest in the growth that once inspired them. They believe that stepping away from the familiar will endanger them, while never realizing that the familiar is the very thing that endangers their spirit. They tell themselves, one day when things are more stable, I will begin. But stability never comes, because it is not a condition of life, it is a fabrication of the mind. Routine and false security work together like twin jailers. Routine dulls the imagination, while false security convinces the prisoner that he is free. Together they keep him walking in circles, never daring to break out, never daring to leap. And as the years pass, the walls grow higher, the door grows smaller, and the chains grow heavier. The most tragic aspect of this condition is that it is chosen, not imposed. No man is forced into mediocrity against his will. The chains of routine are accepted willingly in exchange for the promise that tomorrow will not demand courage. Yet what is life without courage? What is existence without the thrill of risk, the fire of ambition, the pursuit of something greater than survival? The man who trades his freedom for false security awakens one day to find he has neither. At 35, the majority make this trade. They believe they are wise for settling, responsible for avoiding risk, and mature for abandoning their daring. But true wisdom, true responsibility, true maturity is found in recognizing that security is never guaranteed by routine, but only by growth. The man who continues to sharpen his mind, expand his vision, cultivate his skills, and pursue his purpose is secure in ways no job, no possession, no routine can ever provide. His security lies not in his circumstances, but in his capacity. Therefore, the illusion of security must be shattered if one is to beat the odds. Routine must not be allowed to hypnotize the spirit into lifeless repetition. The 35-year-old who will rise above failure must see clearly that his so-called stability is nothing more than temporary comfort wrapped in chains. He must understand that the only true safety lies in becoming indispensable, in building a life rooted in purpose, in daring to take the very risks that others avoid. Those who awaken to this truth discover that 35 is not a dead end, but a fresh beginning. They realize that security is not found in routine, but in adaptability, not in comfort, but in growth, not in conformity, but in the courage to live on their own terms. While the masses continue circling in the prison of familiarity, the few who break free walk into a life that is uncertain but alive, risky but rich, unstable but unstoppable. The greatest gift given to man at birth is not strength, nor intelligence, nor even opportunity. It is imagination. Imagination is the engine of desire, the architect of possibility, the invisible force that pulls man toward greatness. As children, this gift is unrestrained. We dream wildly, without fear, without boundaries, without hesitation. We see ourselves conquering worlds, building empires, creating masterpieces. The child does not ask, is this realistic? He simply declares, this is possible. Yet by the time most reach 35, this sacred gift has been silenced. The imagination that once soared like an eagle now lies in chains, and the desire that once burned like fire has cooled into embers. Why does this happen? Because life, with all its responsibilities, disappointments, and distractions, conspires to bury imagination beneath the weight of practicality. A man begins his adult years full of dreams. He may dream of building a business, of writing books, of traveling the world, of shaping his destiny according to his own design. But as time passes, the voice of society grows louder, commanding him to be realistic, to settle down, to be responsible. Slowly, his imagination becomes something to suppress, not something to trust. He begins to see his desires not as fuel, but as burdens. And by 35, most have placed their dreams in the attic of memory, dusting them off only occasionally to wonder what might have been. The tragedy of this surrender is that imagination does not fade because of age. It fades because of neglect. Desire does not weaken because the years pass. It weakens because it is starved. The man who ceases to imagine is the man who ceases to live fully. He still breathes, still moves, still works, but his spirit has gone silent. He exists in survival mode, locked in the cage of what is, unable to see what could be. It is no accident that so many lives reach a plateau at 35. For when imagination dies, growth dies with it. Without imagination, there can be no vision. Without vision, there can be no desire. And without desire, there can be no progress. A man without imagination is like a ship without a compass, drifting wherever the winds of circumstance carry him. He becomes reactive instead of proactive, settling for whatever life hands him instead of demanding from life what he chooses. The masses fail at 35 because they confuse maturity with resignation. They believe that growing older means abandoning the dreams of youth. They call this being practical, but what they call practical is merely surrender dressed in respectable clothing. True maturity is not the abandonment of imagination, but the discipline to channel it into reality. It is the ability to take the wild energy of youth and direct it with wisdom, perseverance, and strategy. Consider history's greatest achievers. Their triumphs were not the product of routines or careful caution. They were born of imagination, of men and women who dared to envision a world that did not yet exist and then pursued it with relentless desire. These individuals did not grow out of their dreams as they aged. They grew into them. They understood that imagination is not something to be discarded with youth, but something to be strengthened with experience. The 35-year-old who fails is the one who tells himself, it is too late. He believes that the time for dreaming is over, that his course is fixed, that the desires of his heart are now impossible. He convinces himself that his responsibilities are too heavy, his opportunities too few, his energy too depleted. And so he allows his imagination to wither until he no longer believes he is capable of more than what he already has. But the 35-year-old who beats the odds is the one who rekindles his imagination. He refuses to let desire die. He recognizes that every invention, every fortune, every work of art, every revolution was born first in the mind of a dreamer who refused to let the world strip him of imagination. He knows that desire is the fuel of creation, and without it, even the strongest man will stagnate. To live without imagination is to live as a shadow of oneself. To live with imagination is to live as a creator, a builder, a leader of one's own destiny. And desire is the bridge between the two. Imagination paints the picture, desire fuels the pursuit, and action brings it into form. Together they form the holy trinity of achievement. At 35, the challenge is not that imagination has disappeared. It is that it has been buried beneath years of conformity, fear, and disappointment. The man who wishes to rise must dig it out, polish it, and set it ablaze once more. He must give himself permission to want again, to dream again, to dare again. He must stop asking, is it too late? And begin asking, what is still possible if I refuse to quit? For the truth is that nothing is more dangerous than a man who rediscovers his imagination at the very age when most have abandoned theirs. The world belongs to those who keep their desire alive. The masses may laugh at their boldness, may mock their dreams, may call them foolish. Yet history records only the dreamers, never the doubters. At 35, you must decide whether you will live as a doubter, clinging to the safety of resignation, or as a dreamer, daring to build what others believe impossible. For imagination is the one resource that multiplies with use, and desire is the one force that grows stronger when acted upon. The secret is simple. Guard your imagination as a king guards his crown. Do not allow the voices of limitation to silence it. Feed your desire daily with vision, with study, with action. Refuse to let routine bury your fire. For the man who keeps imagination and desire alive at 35 will not only beat the odds, he will bend them to his will. At 35, a curious thing happens to the spirit of most men and women. The fire that once made them bold is replaced with the weight of other people's opinions. When they were younger, they dared to try, to risk, to fall, and to rise again. They were not yet bound by the heavy gaze of neighbors, colleagues, and family who expected them to conform. But by midlife, the desire to avoid judgment has grown stronger than the desire to win. It is at this very age that most people quietly trade the possibility of greatness for the acceptance of the crowd. The chains of judgment are heavier than iron because they are invisible. No law forbids a man from following his dreams. No soldier guards the door of his imagination. No prison confines his ambition. Yet the fear of what others might think is enough to hold him captive for life. He wonders, what if I fail and they laugh? What if I dare and they call me foolish? What if I stumble and they say I wasted my time? These questions echo louder in his mind than the call of his own destiny. And so he does nothing. He plays it safe. He blends into the crowd. He hides his greatness beneath the mask of mediocrity, hoping to avoid the sting of criticism. But here lies the truth. Judgment is unavoidable. If a man fails, he will be judged for failing. If he succeeds, he will be judged for daring to be different. If he plays it safe, he will be judged for being ordinary. No man escapes judgment. The only question is whether he will be judged for conformity or for courage. The 35-year-old who succumbs to this fear convinces himself that he is being wise or responsible. He tells himself that avoiding risk is the mature thing to do. Yet deep down, he knows the truth. He is not avoiding risk, he is avoiding criticism. He is not protecting his family, he is protecting his pride. He is not being realistic, he is being afraid. Fear has taken the driver's seat of his life, and judgment holds the reins. Consider how many brilliant ideas never see the light of day because someone feared the laughter of their peers. How many businesses remain unborn? How many books unwritten? How many inventions buried in notebooks? How many voices silenced, all because a man or woman chose to value approval over achievement? They say, "What will people think of me?" without ever asking, "What will I think of myself if I never try?" And so they live quietly, safely, and visibly until one day they wake to discover that safety has robbed them of life itself. At 35, failure also grows larger in the imagination. A man who once failed in his 20s could shrug it off, telling himself he had time to recover. But by midlife, every failure feels heavier, more permanent, more final. He forgets that failure is not the end, but the beginning of wisdom. He forgets that failure is not a tombstone, but a stepping stone. Instead, he fears it so much that he stops moving altogether. And in his attempt to avoid failure, he embraces the greatest failure of all, the failure to try. The fear of judgment and failure is the perfect weapon of mediocrity, because it paralyzes action. And without action, even the greatest imagination, the strongest desire, the clearest vision dies unborn. Fear whispers to the man at 35, "Stay where you are. Do not risk. Do not dare. Do not draw attention. Blend in, and you will be safe." But safe is an illusion, and blending in is the death of greatness. The masses accept this voice. They live quietly, never stepping outside the boundaries drawn by others. They measure their worth by the approval of the crowd, forgetting that the crowd itself is lost. They build their lives upon the fragile foundation of opinion, which shifts and crumbles with every new trend. They fear the sting of a critic's words more than the sting of regret, and in doing so, they surrender their future. But the few who rise above mediocrity see fear for what it truly is, a liar. They understand that judgment is not a threat, but a signal. If they are being judged, it means they are visible. If they are visible, it means they are doing something uncommon. And if they are doing something uncommon, they are already walking the path of greatness. They do not run from criticism. They expect it, even welcome it, for they know that every man who has ever risen to greatness was first misunderstood, ridiculed, and doubted. At 35, the critical choice is whether to bow to fear or to harness it. Fear cannot be destroyed. It is part of human nature, but it can be conquered. The man who succeeds is not the man who feels no fear. He is the man who acts in spite of it. He takes the risk knowing he may fail, knowing he may be mocked, knowing he may be misunderstood, and yet he acts anyway. In doing so, he discovers that failure is not fatal, that judgment is not lethal, and that courage multiplies with use. The world rewards the daring, not the timid. It remembers the ones who dared to fail, not the ones who played it safe. At 35, if you allow fear of judgment and failure to govern you, you will join the countless who fade quietly into the background, forgotten even by those whose approval you sought. But if you rise above fear, if you dare to be laughed at, to be doubted, to stumble and rise again, you will find that the very things you feared most were illusions, and that beyond them lies the life you were meant to live. Mediocrity has only one weapon, and that weapon is fear. Conquer fear, and mediocrity loses all power. Let others whisper. Let them mock. Let them doubt. Their words cannot imprison you unless you give them permission. At 35, the choice is yours. Live for their approval or live for your destiny. One leads to a slow, quiet death of potential. The other leads to a life that may shake the world. By the age of 35, most people have written the first chapters of their lives in ink they believe cannot be erased. They carry their failures as permanent scars, their disappointments as unchangeable verdicts, their choices as irreversible sentences. They tell themselves, this is who I am now. This is what I must settle for. This is the life I must endure. And so they lock themselves into a destiny that is not destiny at all, but merely a reflection of past habits. Yet the truth is this: no man is bound by his past unless he accepts the chains willingly. The power to break free and rewrite the future is not given to a chosen few. It belongs to any who dare to claim it. The first principle of breaking free is the recognition of personal responsibility. At 35, it is easy to blame circumstances, to blame society, to blame upbringing, to blame luck, but none of these excuses alter the fact that a man holds within his mind the key to his own prison or the door to his own freedom. Responsibility is not a burden, it is liberation. For when you accept that your life is the direct result of your own choices, you also accept that it can be altered by new choices. The man who blames others remains a victim forever. The man who accepts responsibility becomes the master of his fate. The second principle is the cultivation of vision. Without vision, a man remains chained to the present. He repeats his routines, obeys his fears, and circles in mediocrity because he cannot see beyond today. Vision lifts the eyes beyond the immediate and paints a picture of what can be. It reignites imagination, awakens desire, and fuels persistence. At 35, vision is more critical than ever, for it provides a new trajectory when the old one has led only to disappointment. The man who dares to envision a life of abundance, contribution, and fulfillment creates the blueprint for his escape from mediocrity. The third principle is discipline. Desire without discipline is nothing but a flame that burns out quickly. Vision without discipline is nothing but fantasy. At 35, discipline becomes the bridge between imagination and reality. It is the ability to wake before dawn, to study when others sleep, to persist when others quit, to build when others only talk. Discipline is the weapon that cuts through the chains of routine. It is not glamorous, but it is unstoppable. The man who masters discipline writes his life in stone while others scribble theirs in sand. The fourth principle is courage. To break free from mediocrity is to walk a path few dare to tread. It demands the willingness to look foolish, to be misunderstood, to endure failure, to lose before winning. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that purpose matters more than fear. At 35, courage is often buried beneath years of self-doubt and criticism. But it can be rekindled, and when it is, it becomes the force that propels a man forward when others remain stuck. The man who chooses courage over comfort rewrites his story in bold, indelible letters. The fifth principle is growth. Too many at 35 convince themselves that growth belongs to the young, that education ends with school, that learning is behind them. This belief is the death sentence of progress. The truth is that growth is the fountain of youth, and the man who continues to grow never grows old. He studies, he learns, he evolves, he reinvents. While others stagnate, he expands. While others cling to what they know, he hungers for what he does not yet know. Growth transforms 35 from a plateau into a launching pad. It turns the so-called midpoint of life into the beginning of a new ascent. The sixth principle is persistence. Every great transformation is born not of one effort, but of repeated effort, applied consistently over time. At 35, most people have already abandoned persistence. They tried once, twice, perhaps 3 times, and then declared it was not meant to be. They mistake temporary defeat for permanent failure. But persistence is the mark of greatness. It is the refusal to quit, the refusal to surrender, the refusal to accept mediocrity. Persistence bends time itself, turning obstacles into stepping stones and defeats into lessons. The man who persists cannot be denied, for the world itself yields to relentless will. The seventh principle is faith. Not merely in the spiritual sense, but in the unshakable confidence that the unseen will one day become seen. Faith is the invisible foundation upon which all achievement rests. It is the voice that whispers, keep going, though you do not yet see the result. Keep working, though the harvest has not yet come. Keep believing, though the world doubts you. At 35, Faith must be rekindled, for without it, every obstacle appears final. With it, every obstacle becomes temporary. Faith transforms despair into determination, fear into fire, and mediocrity into mastery. Together, these principles form the path of liberation. They are not theories, but laws of life, as real and as unyielding as gravity. Those who embrace them rise. Those who ignore them sink. At 35, these principles become the dividing line between those who fade quietly into the background and those who emerge into the second half of life with greater power than ever before. The man who accepts responsibility, cultivates vision, practices discipline, summons courage, commits to growth, persists through setbacks, and builds unshakable faith, discovers that 35 is not the age of decline, but the age of dominion. He breaks the chains of routine, shatters the illusion of security, silences the fear of judgment, rekindles imagination, and writes his future not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of destiny.